Hi, was that the 4 o'clock bell? Oh, no, it's time for another episode of the Self-Reliant Creative Process. And our last episode, we discussed the first two guidelines, which had to do with releasing judgment at the onset of the creative process, allowing ourselves to just have ideas and be uncensored and let the flow begin. And then once it was concluded and we felt pretty complete with it, we moved on to the second guideline, which was to really discern whether there is reality to what we're trying to do and realistic possibility, and to otherwise attempt to, well, kill the creation. If it's a bad idea, let's find out right away and move on. Because there's lots of ideas. Lots of ideas. You're a big person. You got lots of potential. So let's get to that potential. So today, we're going to talk about the next guideline. And it's a concept that Andy and I have talked a lot about. And it has to do with a mindset. Where are we within ourselves as we engage the creative process? And we consider it a mindset of what we would call staying flat. And being flat represents a place where we set aside opinions and judgments and we're present and conscious and considered and open. And events become more of a sense of the just one thing to the next, or changes of circumstances, maybe things occurred, but nothing to ruminate or get all worked up about. It's like the next choice and decision. And there's not so much personalizing about why or how it came to be this way. And the mindset here is a temperament that represents the space where the creative process lives. Situational judgment determines the meaning we assign to events. And when we have less judgment about events, and it's more just a change of circumstances in our mindset, how we look at it, that allows for greater possibility. And it also allows for a more nuanced interpretation of the events as they unfold. And let's face it, inevitably the outcomes are often different than what we think should happen. So we resist being flat for a lot of reasons. One of them is because a lot of us are stimulus junkies, and we want these very high emotional states, and they infuse our mindset. And when we first are conjuring up great ideas, and then there's a point where if it continues, we kind of like start to fly off the handle, and we lose possession of ourselves and we lose control of things. So you can't be jacked up all the time. It's not sustainable. So the idea is finding this middle ground. Now, you need to be excited about what you're doing, but you need to manage the excitement. And the flip of that is when things get a little hard, or you kind of get depressed by the lack of outcomes or the speed of which things are getting done, it's not as bad. So the highs aren't as high maybe, and the lows aren't as low, but you're not like in a monotone necessarily. But you spend more of the time in that sort of middle, more relaxed, comfortable area. Here's an example, a hurricane. So the biggest action in a hurricane is actually in the center, in the eye of the storm. And that's where everything is calm and quiet. That's the vantage point of being flat. So all hell is going on around you, and you can stay calm, centered, connected. Because we can't sustain existing in the outer parts of the hurricane, getting tossed back and forth all the time. But we stay in the center of it. We're golden. And I think a lot of the outer portion of that hurricane in daily life is really our head gap. It's our self-talk. It's everyone else's head gap back and forth with us, and all the people and things we're renting space out to in our heads. And when we get flat, we kind of just transcend that, because we're getting absorbed and we're getting really engaged in what we're doing, so we kind of stop thinking about anything else, and especially the unproductive head gap. And perhaps we may even stop thinking altogether. It's like you're just there, and it just flows at that point. And certainly we have to have some requisite time on task with the matter at hand. And highly creative people, I think, understand that. But at the same time, the emotional equivalent involves being sober and serene and curious and available and balanced. And we're in a very comfortable place. We're in our equilibrium. And that cultivates a mindset of availability, less head gab, and our attention is on the present moment. So the mindset of being flat is about being present without judgment. You decide and act when you're in that flat place. Now, let's circle back to one of the earlier Venn diagrams that we discussed that had to do with intellect and intuition, because I think they really connect to this idea of being flat, that as we move back and forth from our intelligence and using our intelligence to using and working with our intuition, we navigate the waters of the creative process much more easily. So we got to understand that our minds do organize thoughts, but they don't initiate all of them. And they also receive thoughts. And the housing of those received thoughts connects with what Carl Jung, a very noted Swiss psychiatrist, called the collective unconscious. And what he was referring to was structures of the unconscious mind that are shared among beings of the same species. So the creative process actually is what's providing the connection where that awareness and the action merge together, and it's almost as if the task performs itself. So our intellect reflects using our smarts and applying our unique cognitive skill sets and abilities, and of course they're critical in mastering and achieving goals and progressing in life. But we have to choose wisely. And our intellect is a great catalyst. But when we're engaged and we're really like in the creative process, Andy and I like to use the term when we're in the soup. And you'll see this with musicians. They look so enthralled as they're playing their instrument. It's like they're being carried up. It's just this beautiful energy that they have. And it's like a vastness, and there's a lack of conflict. And sometimes it's hard, almost impossible, for our intellectual minds to really comprehend that. But they don't have to. Because being in the soup is almost like an empathetic listening. It's not judgment, it's not criticizing, strategizing, or fixing. It's just being there. And this embodies an intuitive state that we all possess. Intuition infuses itself into everyone's makeup. It's like the other five senses overshadow this sixth sense, this inner voice speaking to and through us. And frankly, society overemphasizes developing the educated, learned self at the expense of the innate intuitive self. But accessing one's intuition requires dwelling in the present moment, stopping fixation on the past or present, and operating with a more relaxed internal environment, which is conducive to quiet thought and receptivity. All of us routinely are getting gut feelings in periods of heightened awareness. This calm yet alert state exemplifies what being present looks and feels like. And the intuition acts independent of our educated conscious mind. And when you think about it, our educated mind or our intellect was essentially non-existent at birth. But we began life with our intuition fully formed. That's the part of us that knows to breathe and to eat and to sleep and all of those things. That's where that stems from. And there's nothing about our intuition to develop. It's fully formed, but we have to utilize it. We have to work with it. We have to sense it. We have to develop a relationship with it. So there are three main aspects of our intuition to consider. One is that it is complete at birth. And second, that it acts independent of our conscious mind. And thirdly, it is very much what is internally directing our life. And this awareness of intuition allows us to manifest spontaneity. And those are the attributes, spontaneity and creativity, that are so much a part of the creative process and so much about what we admire in children. Unfortunately, somewhere between childhood and adulthood, the intuition gets inhibited, it gets repressed, and just falls into disuse. So we have to make sure that we live in ways different for each of us that allows us to facilitate and access that intuition. Because otherwise, we're just focused on what we should do. And we go around all day shoulding all over ourselves and everybody else. And it reminds me of a client that had said, after going through the course in this particular area about intuition, is that his life reflected a more unified whole using his intuition as well as his intellect. And what he really discovered was that the whole world is ready, waiting, and good to go. But first he had to get good to go. Something to think about for all of us. And something else to think about for all of us is the homework. And that is, what circumstances allow you to remain flat? What goes on in life in such a way, and elements of life, that you can pretty much stay flat around? And what areas are not so much that way? And then where are you more willing and able to use your intuition? And where might you use a little bit of practice? So please comment below, and then like and subscribe the channel, and then join us for the next episode. And in the meantime, you have yourself just a splendid day.